20 years ago, on a Monday, April 10th, 2006, many children were looking forward to Easter, which would be celebrated the following Sunday on the 16th. They were looking forward to the long holiday, possible trips, or simply the certainty that they would get lots of chocolates. Look, I don't even remember what I was doing on that day, but Giovanna dos Reis Costa's family remembers that date very well. At the time, the girl was 9 years old and lived in the city of Quatro Barras in the metropolitan region of Curitiba. The family remembers because it was on that day, April 10th, that Giovanna left home alone to sell the school's Easter raffle tickets and never came back. A walk through the neighborhood from which she never returned as the girl was swallowed by the night. In these 20 years, Giovanna's name could have been forgotten, lost among countless other criminal records. But the horrific details of her death, which were identified as part of a ritual, changed the investigation. Literally into a spectacle, into a witch hunt, and the trial into a legal nightmare. About to expire now on its 20th anniversary. However, new evidence that emerged just a few days ago may finally bring to justice the monster responsible for Giovanna's death. I'm Marcos Campos, welcome everyone. Today we have a different episode on the channel. I asked in our members group, and if you're not a part of it yet, here's an invitation to become a member. People said they think it could be cool, so here's the deal. I'll explain it briefly. This episode here, since it has a lot of information, actually this case, I'm going to split it into episodes. So this will be the first episode of the Giovanna case, okay? So I'm going to make a playlist, and then we'll have all the episodes related to this case there all together, all right? Look, I need to let you know that this won't be a rule on the channel, okay? It's an experiment I'm doing, so don't worry. You don't need to comment like, oh, I liked it better the other way. Relax, it's just an experiment. If it works out, if people like it, we'll do it with other cases, but not in all of them, okay? Deal? That's it, with that out of the way, let's get to the facts. Look, guys, there are two main lines of investigation that we're going to explore here, one after the other, okay? That's why the names of several people involved in the process will appear. That is, people who at some point during these 20 years were considered suspects, accused, tried, and acquitted. In other words, they will be mentioned in the same way as the lawyers, prosecutors, and police chiefs because they are part of the story we are telling. We are here reconstructing, based, of course, on open sources, public sources, on what has been made public about the case during all this time. And looking back, it will be easy to notice some mistakes, okay? But our goal here is not to provoke personal criticism, all right? That said, we will now continue with the story. Giovanna disappears then on April 10, 2006, while she was selling tickets for a school Easter egg raffle near her house, there in Quatro Barras in the metropolitan region of Curitiba. Since the girl didn't return home at the end of that afternoon, as was expected, her parents, Mr. Altavir Costa, who was 45 years old at the time, and Mrs. Cristina Aparecida Costa, who was 38, started looking for their daughter. You know how that goes, right? When that uncertain worry starts to take over right in the pit of your stomach, and totally anxious, people start asking everyone. After all, we're talking about a girl named Carol who was 9 years old, man. So soon the neighbors joined the family in their distress to try to find the girl as soon as possible. Especially since, as they later said in their official statement to the police, some of them were visited by Giovanna, okay? Some people. And they bought the Easter raffle she was selling, so it was strange for her to disappear so close to home, and this of course moved a lot of people. Despite that, no one had anything special to report. Given the risk she could be facing, the alternative then was to report the disappearance officially, file a police report. Even if that means formalizing the seriousness of the situation, right? It's that story I've already told you here, isn't it? You get that feeling of saying something like this? Admitting it actually could be serious and I need the police. Unfortunately, days later, on April 12th, her body was found in a vacant lot wrapped in blue or white plastic garbage bags. Both pieces of information appear in the reports, and she was tied up with electrical wires. The forensic examination determined that the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation, either by strangulation or suffocation, and that the victim also showed extreme signs of sexual violence. Unfortunately, it's necessary to share some details here so that the investigation process can be understood, okay? The medical examiner's report states that a metallic object had been inserted into the victim's private parts. Giovanna's clothes were found in another vacant lot, about 50 meters away from the house where she had been living with her family. And preliminarily, the police chief who was responsible for the case at the time, Dr. Margarete Alferez de Oliveira Mota, stated that the child disappeared in that area and the body was also found there. Everything indicates that the crime took place in one of those neighboring houses. In the statements made by the police chief based on the autopsy report, the girl was bled alive. In other words, while her heart was still beating, a metallic object with an irregular tip was inserted into her vagina and tore the area. The doctor stated that when he examined the body, all the organs were pale. There was no blood at all. The blood gushed out because her heart was still working while she was being tortured. The removal of the blood may have taken more than an hour, and the girl was suffocated only after this bleeding. Based on this finding, the theory of a ritual killing involving the collection of the victim's blood was then developed. An action present in religious rituals when certain animals are sacrificed. At that moment then, what was the investigation looking for? For whom? For suspects who fit the profile of ritualistic killers, right? Practically like magic, just like we see in movies. Although those so-called sorcerer killers, witches, practitioners of magic, are pretty rare in true crime stories, right? Both national and international. There are several cases of horrible, violent crimes that were initially attributed to this kind of thing, but later, as the investigation progressed, it was understood that in fact these were crimes committed during psychotic episodes or by very evil people who were trying to deceive the police. I even think that the only case where the investigation actually pointed to the practice of human sacrifice was that of a boy named Adam, who was found there in the River Thames in London. In 2001, I don't know if you remember this African child whose case has already been presented here on the channel. Yeah, but coming back here, it's reported that the thicket where Giovanna's body was found bordered a piece of land that housed a group of Romani people, among them a family called Petrovic. They then became suspects in the girl's death when they fled the area, in quotes, before the girl's body was found. And look, here I could make two observations. Please comment down below and let me know what you think, okay? They were visited by the police during the search for Giovanna. They were discriminated against by the local community. And it's worth noting that in an interview from 2022, a long time later, one of these so-called involved people, Pero himself, explains that they didn't run away from home at the time of the crime. The family was in Curitiba, just a few kilometers from Quatro Barras, preparing for and attending Pero's brother's wedding, a party that, per gypsy tradition, lasts several days. But the police had a blanket search warrant for all the properties in the area. So they entered and searched the Petrovic family's house, where 12 strands of hair were found in the bathroom drain, supposedly connected to the victim, and also supermarket bags identical to the ones that were there. According to the police chief, as part of the investigation, the Petrovic family was sought in other states, such as São Paulo and Santa Catarina, when wiretaps revealed strange habits, in quotes, and the connection of the gypsies with drug trafficking and fraud. Approximately 1 year after Giovanna's death, with the case stalled, members of this family, the former residents of Quatro Barras, were arrested. They were arrested on May 26, 2007 in Araçatuba, in the countryside of São Paulo, by the city's military police. The following people were suspects in the Paraná case. Vera Petrovic, who was 58 years old at the time, known in her community as Diva the Fortune Teller, and her son Pero. They were at the house of relatives in a middle-class neighborhood in the city of Araçatuba, São Paulo. In addition to them, Pero's father-in-law was also considered involved in the crime, a man named Renato Michel, the father of Pero's wife, who was a 16-year-old teenager at the time. Father-in-law and son-in-law were professionally described as self-employed salesmen. Based on evidence gathered by the police, the prosecutor, Otasilio Sacerdote, then requested the opening of criminal proceedings against the three adults and the placement of the teenager in a juvenile facility. Trial and acquittal. On March 12, 2012, a Monday, at 9:30 a.m., the jury court in Curitiba held the trial of the Roma people suspected of the murder of Giovanna dos Reis Costa. The charge against them was murder with two aggravating factors, committed in the context of a magic ritual. Regarding the motive, the prosecutor, Otasilio, from Quatro Barras, claimed that Vera Petrovic was the mastermind behind the crime, because she needed the blood of a virgin for a ritual that would guarantee prosperity and, most importantly, the virility of another son of hers, since this other son was getting married around that time when everything happened. She, the matriarch of the family then, busy with the wedding preparations, would have received help from her son Pero, her daughter-in-law, Pero's wife, and also from that man, Pero's father-in-law, Renato Michel. Within this fanciful narrative, Giovanna supposedly made the mistake of interacting with the gypsy neighbors precisely at the time when they were looking for a victim for the macabre prenuptial sacrifice. It's like one of those bizarre horror movies, right? It's said that the girl asked several schoolmates to go with her to sell the raffle tickets, but none of them could go. So Giovanna ended up going alone, walked through the neighborhood streets, and became an easy target. Look, here I'm going to give you all the details of this trial, but I'll tell you right now that the defendants were acquitted. In 2012, when the trial took place, the defendants were represented by the law firm of attorney Claudio Dalledoni Jr., a national reference in the legal field and present in several high-profile cases. According to the defense of the accused, there were flaws in the police investigation, and there was no evidence to convict Vera Pero and his father-in-law, Michel. A defesa fez trabalho de... The prosecutor and the jurors were convinced. It was shown that there was no solid evidence against the defendants, against all three defendants. According to lawyer Dalledoni, the prosecution was convinced of the defendants' innocence and requested their acquittal. And look, here's an extremely important point, because we can't forget that the accused spent 6 years in prison waiting for the trial. 6 years in prison waiting for a trial. You know that Pero went through a severe depression during that time. He lost a lot of weight, but honestly, it's hard to imagine how they faced this real tsunami in their lives, isn't it? Yeah, guys, the defense argued that Giovanna's death happened in a way similar to the murder of Raquel Janofri, which raised the possibility of a pedophile loose in the area, a predator lurking, a serial killer active in Curitiba and nearby areas. The photos of the girls placed side by side show similarities between them, which could perhaps be part of a killer's modus operandi. Today we know that this theory was wrong, however, and that there were two different killers in the cases of Giovanna Costa and Raquel Janofri. For those who don't remember, she's the girl who was found abused and dead in a suitcase abandoned at the Curitiba bus and train station on August 5, 2008. 3 days after she disappeared, well, at the time of the trials of the Romani defendants, in Giovanna's case, with all the newspapers focused on the case, it was necessary for the president of the Association for the Preservation of Romani Culture, Mr. Claudio Domingos Jovanovic, to explain that rituals involving human sacrifices have nothing to do with Romani culture. Quite concerned about the discrimination that the Romani community was suffering as a result of the supposed involvement of the Romani people in Giovanna's murder, he stated that things shouldn't be confused, nor should there be a cultural genocide. According to him, people, because they are unfamiliar with Romani culture, had already prejudged the defendants, extending the condemnation to the entire Romani community. It's that story, you know, guys. Something gets planted, sensationalism starts to become a monster, and then a lot of ignorant people start buying into it. Without knowing anything, the person reads the headline, the banner, and then goes around, talking nonsense, and it creates a really complicated situation, right? There are cases out there that prove this, that panic and rumors end up resulting in very serious things, right? Remember that woman who was lynched on the coast because she was mistaken for a witch or something like that? Yeah, man, it's just completely absurd, but let's keep going here. Particularly in Paraná, the Romani people were being harassed. Their tents were being burned. Claudio Domingos and Jovanovic. It was very clear in considering that if Vera and Pero were found guilty in the case, hypothetically, it would correspond to a crime committed by them, an isolated act for which they would be responsible. An act of violence that could not be associated with their culture, the Roma. The idea that Roma steal little children is part of folklore, like other beliefs with no basis at all. So, what the Roma could expect and hope for was to be treated with respect like any other Brazilian citizen. In short, during the 3 days of trial, more than 15 witnesses for the defense and prosecution were heard. The jurors voted for the defendant's innocence after the prosecutor, Dr. Marcelo Balzer, asked for their acquittal. Because he understood, of course, that there was not enough evidence against any of the defendants. In addition, the prosecutor, Marcelo, mentioned that the police chief was facing a corruption case. He pointed out 15 mistakes in the complaint filed by the prosecutor from the Campina Grande do Sul district. A relevant detail was the collaboration of Roma, who were rivals of the Petrovic family, who carried out the work requested by the police chief. In the translation of the Romani dialect, Romani, from the recordings and wiretaps, which were harmful to the Roma and contributed to the arrest of Roma, mother and son. Do you remember that I mentioned at the beginning that there were some calls that that the investigation considered strange, unusual? Well, that's what this is about. Finally, Dr. Dalladoni argued that the failures of the police investigation had two major consequences: the imprisonment of innocent people and the fact that the killer remained free since there was no further investigation after the Roma were detained. Giovanna's parents didn't even show up on the third and final day of the trial when the sentence was given. And look, while preparing this episode, we ended up discovering, through the work of journalist Christian Fortes, that among those present at the trial was the lawyer Miriam Stanescon, 60 years old. She was the first Romani woman to earn a college degree in Brazil. Graduating in law from Gama Filho University in Rio de Janeiro in '73, Miriam chose to devote her career to supporting her Romani community, right? That's why she traveled from Rio de Janeiro to Curitiba to attend all 3 days of the trial and support her people. On that occasion, she gave interviews and talked about the discrimination that the Romani people face, not only in Brazil, but all over the world. And in light of all this, the big question we have here in a trial like this, which leads to the acquittal of the suspects, is if not them, Vera and Pero, then who would be responsible for this crime? The key to this mystery seems to have been presented by one of the witnesses in the case, a former neighbor of the Costa family. And what stood out in her testimony in court was what we didn't find out, at least not on that occasion. During the 3 days of trial, more than 15 people testified. However, what really caught everyone's attention there was the testimony of the ex-wife of a driver who lived near the crime scene. Because her testimony was confidential and those present were asked to leave the courtroom. Maybe an illegal practice within the proceedings, but unusual, I would say. What do you think? It was clear there was suspicion that he, the ex-husband, could be responsible for the crime. But between 2012 and 2025, nothing happened, no new developments. Or rather, the police carried out investigations into Giovanna's death with the case already filed away. So now, in 2026, with the statute of limitations for the crime about to expire, the court decided to reopen the case after evidence was presented linking a man to the crime. But to keep up with everything that's happening, with the updates, I invite you to subscribe, or rather, to activate your notification bell. The next episode will be the continuation of this one in the series about the Giovanna case. I think it's really worth it, right, guys? It's an extremely symbolic case of unparalleled violence, so I think it's worth telling you all the details, agreed? So I'll see you in the next episode of the Giovanna case. Remember that the regular cases on the channel will continue, okay? Don't worry, thanks for being here. A kiss from Ruivo. See you next time.